Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here with another bonus Smarter Science of Sloan podcast and have a special treat for us today because we have a guest who is really almost like Wonder Woman here because this is amazing. We have a woman who has a PhD in just like hardcore science. She's a mom and she has experienced triple digit sustained weight loss. And she's a prolific blogger and she's a prolific author and she's just awesome. Her name's Sarah Ballantyne. She's here. She's the proprietor of the PaleoMom.com. She's got a book coming out in September that you can pre-order on Amazon now called The Paleo Approach, which is just going to rewrite the book on autoimmune disease. And then she's also got the Paleo View podcast and she's here with us. I can't believe it. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. I'm blushing. That was a really nice introduction.
I know I had a guest on a while back who was just like, when I'm having a bad day, I think I'm just going to play the first 30 seconds of this podcast over and over again.
That's totally an ego boost. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I tried to just quickly summarize your story, but that's really, I mean, we can talk about the science all day. Your story, however, is so unique. I mean, you as a person, your unique value proposition as an individual is truly unique. Please just tell us your story.
Well, I was an overweight teenager. And as I got into my early 20s, I hit somewhere in the high 200s. I stopped weighing myself at 265 pounds. That was when I hit afraid to go on the scale. And in those days, I was introduced to the concept of a low-carb diet. And so I moved away from home and went to grad school and decided to try a low-carb diet and had fantastic success with it. I lost 100 pounds. I then decided that running marathons would be a good idea. And I got what I thought was really healthy. But at the same time, I started having more health issues. So in those days, my definition of really healthy was the fact that I could run for 4.5 hours and that I could wear, size 8 clothes. I also, at the same time, was developing irritable bowel syndrome. As I had a really acute onset of adult asthma. So it was like I was fine, and then all of a sudden I was coughing up blood. I was having migraines. I was having anxiety attacks. I started having weird rashes on my skin, and I got really, really sick.
But you were running marathons, so clearly you were doing okay.
Yeah, my definition of health was, I could run a marathon, but I got really sick, and I ended up so sick that I was hospitalized, and then I was apartment bound for 3 months. I was put on extremely high doses of steroids, and I couldn't breathe walking from the bedroom to the living room. Like I would run out of breath, and it turns out that my immune system was going crazy. It was probably a variety of factors. It was probably some foods that I thought were healthy that I was eating that really weren't, the high stress of being in graduate school, and the high stress I was putting on my body with marathon running, which wasn't a good choice for me, really, on hindsight. And so I ended up gaining 50 pounds in the first 6 weeks after I got sick, and gaining the other 50 pounds more slowly over the next year. My ability to exercise was completely robbed from me. It was years and years and years before my lungs were non-reactive enough that I could even walk briskly. I was on steroids for years, and at that time I also was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called lichen planus, which was one of the funny skin rashes I had. And I gained even more weight. In the end, I gained even more weight back than I had lost. I struggled with my health for most of the next 7 years. I had actually lost weight to get pregnant. I was only 255 pounds when I got pregnant the first time. I had gestational diabetes and had preeclampsia when I went into labor, which made for a very complicated labor and delivery. And I was sick. And somewhere in there, around the time my oldest daughter was a year, I realized I had prediabetes. And I decided I had better get my act together. So I ended up, again, using sort of a low carb diet approach, pulling up my socks, and I lost 100 pounds again. I had a much healthier second pregnancy, but I always battled with this autoimmune disease. And it was that battle with autoimmune disease that brought me to really critically look at the quality of the food that I was eating and really research exactly how the foods that I was eating were interacting with my body and interacting with my immune system. And that's become something that I'm really, really passionate about, is understanding the relationship between diet and the immune system, and between lifestyle factors in the immune system, things like sleep and stress management and circadian rhythms. So I ended up completely transforming how I ate, and ended up completely resolving health issues that I had had. I'd had irritable bowel syndrome for 12 years. I switched to what is called a paleo diet, and within 2 weeks, I was able to go off 6 prescription medications. I lost 20 more pounds. I have sustained now a 120-pound weight loss for a couple of years, quite effortlessly. I don't measure my food. I don't count my calories. Actually, I eat like a ton and enjoy it. And I'm managing my autoimmune disease without any prescription medications. And that experience of, reading all the science and learning about the importance of food quality and what are better choices of foods to eat, and then also applying it to myself and seeing such amazing improvements in my own health is what inspired me to start a blog and a podcast and write a book. So that, in the nutshell, is my story.
Wow, that is a story for the ages, Sarah. And a couple things I want to dig into. First is, you mentioned that you taking more of a paleo approach, and just this essentially means you're eating essentially whenever you're hungry until you're no longer hungry, basically as long as it could be found directly in nature. Is that pretty close?
Yeah. So my diet focuses on quality meats and seafood, quality vegetables, and quality fruits. I eat as much of those foods as I want to eat. And by eating those foods, I'm getting really good protein, really high quality fats, and really high quality, low glycemic index carbohydrates, lots of good fiber, lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, lots of antioxidants. And those are all things that are shown over and over and over again in the scientific literature to be important for like all health. I mean, not just because I have an autoimmune disease. You look at any chronic disease, many of which are epidemic now, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even cancer. These are all things that are shown to prevent those diseases, and also in many cases reverse them once they've started. So it's a diet that's really nutrient dense. I mean, that's really my focus, is I only eat the most nutrient dense foods. And because of that, I'm flooding my system with everything it needs to work optimally. So I am basically creating an environment inside my body that is conducive to health, as opposed to eating foods that don't have a lot of nutritional value. Some of the foods I avoid actually stop your body from absorbing nutrients. Like, not only do they not have a lot of nutritional value, but they actually decrease the nutritional value of anything else you eat at the same time. I avoid foods that cause inflammation or that cause what is sort of called a leaky gut. And a lot of people don't like the term leaky gut. I really like that there's more scientists and more people in the medical profession who are starting to own that term, because it is really descriptive. And what it it's more technically called increased intestinal permeability. What it means is there's a variety of substances in certain foods that are known to interact with the gut barrier, so the cells that form the tube that is our small intestine, where we absorb all of our nutrition. There are substances in some foods that basically cause little holes, very, very tiny holes, but it's enough for things that are inside your gut that are supposed to be inside and not inside your body. They're supposed to be in your gut, which is technically outside your body, to leak into your body. And these cause all kinds of problems. Immediately across that barrier is 80% of your immune system. So when things that are not supposed to be in your body leak into your body, it activates the immune system, and that is turning out to be one of the fundamental contributors to chronic disease, including autoimmune disease. So it's become something that I've become really I put my geek on and I get really into the detailed science of it, and it's something I've become really passionate about. I mean, when I finished writing the section on my book about agglutinins, which are a type of protein that are found in grains and in legumes, and I was specifically looking at the effects of wheat germ agglutinin, which is a protein in wheat, hence the name. When I was reading about the effects that this has on the human body, I couldn't believe it was legal. It was so startling how much we know about the detrimental effects of wheat germ agglutinin and how that information is not disseminated publicly. It's just, because, we as humans ate wheat for longer than the FDA has been around, I guess. And then it must be okay. And when you actually look at the science, it's really powerful. And there are effects that are, there's some effects that people with genetic susceptibilities would have an exaggerated response to, which explains why, some people get these chronic diseases and some people don't. But there are effects that happen in everybody. And it's really important that with genetically modified grains, all of these problematic proteins, including wheat germ agglutinin, are increased because they're the plant's defense mechanism. So when you genetically modify a grain to have more, wheat germ agglutinin or more gluten, those grains are easier crops to grow. So they're more resistant to pests, they're more resistant to insects and fungal infections. So it means a higher crop yield, which of course then helps drive the prices of those foods down, and we get this great food system where everything's cheap but nothing has nutritional value. That food system we have. And so when we genetically modify these crops, I mean, it's having cheap food is a great goal, but not at the expense of nutrition. And what happens when we genetically modify these crops is we increase the number of proteins in them that are problematic for human health. And it's probably one of the reasons why all of these chronic diseases have seen dramatic increases in the last 30 years. I mean, also our intake of those types of foods has increased. So not only are the problematic proteins in them increasing, but we're, as a society, eating more of them.
Well, Sarah, let me just really quickly. I'm gonna put my mainstream media hat on here real quick, and I'll give you a response here. So, Sarah, it sounds like it's all about eating everything in moderation and just cutting calories. Is that what you're saying? No, just kidding.
Oh no.
It's just everything in moderation, right? I mean, because it's just a calorie at the end of the day, and we just need to eat less.
There is so information showing that it's such an oversimplification, and it's such a falsehood to say it's all about calories. Not that calories are unimportant. Mm-hmm. Certainly, even if you're eating really, really high quality foods, you can still overeat, and that can still It's harder to overeat because you tend to get full. But if you really wanted to, you could still eat excess calories and still put on weight. But there's so much more importance in terms of hormone regulation.
Mm.
And the foods that you eat affect your hormones. Um, you know, insulin is a hormone, and insulin regulation has really important effects on your immune system. But it also affects, hunger, stress, and the hormones that regulate hunger and the hormones that regulate stress. There's a really complex interplay between all of those hormones. There's a really complex interplay between what is called the fat hormone, or leptin, if people have heard of that hormone, what is called the main hunger hormone, or ghrelin, which is the hormone that your stomach releases when it's empty that makes you feel hungry. Those hormones all interact with the immune system, and they're all dysregulated by eating diets that are nutritionally poor and energy rich. So that means eating diets that are full of empty carbohydrates. And, I consider whole grains to be empty carbohydrates. I know that there's lots of people who say, oh, well, you have to eat your healthy whole grains because they're so nutritious. Whole grains displace vegetables. I mean, when you put, a slice of bread on your plate, you're putting it there as your filler, as your food. You might put it there instead of, what else would you put there? Some steamed broccoli or a salad. Vegetables are higher in every single vitamin and mineral than even your healthiest grain product. They're similar in manganese, but other than that, vegetables contain double, triple, sometimes 10 times as much of every vitamin and mineral. They also contain more fiber, and a lot more fiber per calorie. I mean, that's the other thing, is that grains digest very, very quickly into sugar. And 2 slices of multigrain bread hit your blood the same as 6 spoonfuls of sugar. I mean, your body doesn't know the difference. That sugar hits your body so quickly. Vegetables, it's not like that. They have much less sugar in them, and because of the fiber, it doesn't hit your blood like that. You regulate your blood sugar so much better with vegetables. So I'm really pro vegetable, if you can't tell, and I'm really anti empty calories. And so I consider anything that is not nutritionally dense, and especially anything that is not nutritionally dense, but that also increases your blood sugar, to be, I don't consider it to be food.
Oh, and I love what you bring up in terms of the like technical economics term, is the opportunity cost. Is if you're eating a whole wheat bread, not only are you eating the whole wheat bread, which is spiking your blood sugar, causing all sorts of hormonal dysregulation and flooding your body with anti-nutrients. So that's bad. But in addition to that, you are missing out on all the other good stuff you could be taking in with more nutrient dense food. So it's a 1-2 punch.
Right. And many, if not all, chronic diseases have been associated with micronutrient deficiencies. So what that means is deficiencies in specific vitamins and specific minerals. And those happen to be the specific vitamins and specific minerals that are not found in grains.
Mm-hmm.
By eating, these whole grain heavy diets, you're probably eating more energy than you actually need, because you feed this insulin spike, then blood sugar crash, then craving for more food cycle, which is not helpful if you're trying to be healthy or lose weight. But you're also feeding these micronutrient deficiencies. So you are making yourself deficient in vitamins and minerals that you need to have a functioning immune system, that you need to be able to control the inflammation in your arteries so that you don't get cardiovascular disease. So replacing those foods with vegetables, with quality fats. So that for me, that means, fats from fish, fats from pastured and grass-fed animals. Those are animals that eat the diet that they're meant to eat. Fats from, foods like avocado and olives. I mean, when you replace grains with those foods, you're getting so much more nutrition. I mean, I could also talk about the importance of fats in the human diet, because one of the biggest correlators with disease is a deficiency in fat-soluble vitamins. And that probably reflects the move from eating fats that come more from animal fats to vegetable oils. And a lot of the fat-soluble vitamins that we tend to be deficient in are the ones that are found in quality animal fats and are not found in margarine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And while fats is a little bit more complicated than that, it's one of the things that, this move to low-fat diets, because really on the surface, eating fat makes you fat just sounds like it should be right.
Absolutely.
Sounds like it makes sense. And really, it's not at all right. And there's lots of great resources for people out there to explain why it has to do with eating excessive sugar, not fat. But when you avoid fat, not only are you depriving your body of an essential nutrient, you need fat. The walls of every cell in your body are made out of fat. Your brain is largely made out of fat. Not only do you need fat, but also those fat-soluble vitamins that we are, taking vitamin D pills because we're not spending enough time outside and we're not eating enough fat in our diet to be able to make it ourselves. It's really important to eat good quality fats. And that really good quality fats are fats that come from, properly pastured animals, fish, and those great monounsaturated fats that are found in vegetables that if you squeeze them, you get fat, not grains where you have to mechanically separate out the fat and do a huge process in order to get the fat. If you can, do you remember, this totally dates me, do you remember the Simpsons episode where Homer Simpson decides he's going to become morbidly obese?
Oh, absolutely. Please mash the keypad to obtain a special dialing wand. That episode, yes.
His philosophy is if you rub the food on a piece of paper and the paper turns translucent, it's a good food to eat.
Yes.
So I'm not saying hamburger, but if you can really simply get the fat out of a food just by mashing up the food and letting the fat float to the surface, like olives, like coconut, like avocado, then that's a good fat. It just reminded me of that scene where he rubs
any Simpsons reference is welcome on this show, so you don't have to hesitate. Well, and Sarah, one thing, you've said so many wonderful things here. One thing that I wanted to drill into, because I think even for me, it still sounds like big news every time I hear it, and the media certainly has fun with it. But the fact that it sounds like big news to me shows how far we've gotten away from a simpler and healthier view of nutrition. And that's, you mentioned something along the lines of when you don't eat the things that are required for health, aka essential nutrients, macro and micro, you can't remain healthy. And in some ways, that is the most obvious statement we could ever make. Like, there are things that are essential to human health: vitamins, minerals, proteins, essential fats. If we don't eat those, our body can't function properly. That's called disease. But like, we keep hearing the media like, when you don't eat enough vitamins, like, or here we'll hear the flip side of it, which is by eating a healthier diet, diseases go away. And we're like, that's a miracle. And in some ways it kind of is, but in other ways it's like the fact that that isn't just abundantly obvious, that eating that which is required for health enables health, and eating that which is not required for health, and in fact blocks our absorption of the things that are required for health, causes disease. The fact that that is newsworthy, I think says something about our culture.
Well, and that we have to do scientific studies in order to prove it.
Exactly.
Part of it is, for most of human history, the only foods we've had access to have been high quality foods.
Hmm.
And it wasn't something that we had to think about. No one was overweight. No one had these chronic diseases. You just ate what you could grow in your garden, like not just hunter-gatherer populations, but hunter-gatherer farmer, populations. What you could fish, what you could hunt, or the animals that you had domesticated. Um, and the even in those times, even though there was some foods that I consider suboptimal foods, were included in the human diet. So I'm thinking like, a few hundred years ago, um, you know, things like high fructose corn syrup, things like refined white flour, they weren't available. Everything was what you grew yourself. Um, and clearly there was more of these diseases than there were pre-agriculture. But the reason why we've seen such a huge increase in chronic disease, I mean, it's everything really, like every disease, um, over the last 30 years has been because these foods have become more and more refined and more pervasive in the food system. So they're just everywhere. I mean, it's so hard to buy food in a grocery store and not buy those kinds of foods. I had a friend ask me, what should I look for on a label? Like, what are ingredients I should look for on a label that means that food's healthy? I said, well, if the food has a label, chances are it's not healthy.
Exactly.
Um, I buy very, very few foods that have labels, and mostly, most fruits, vegetables, and meat and fish typically don't have labels. They typically, you know, come just piled somewhere, and you throw it in your little plastic bag, or you better yet go to a farmer's market and buy it fresh from the farmer who is really passionate about his dirt. So you're getting, way better tasting produce that also happens to be way more vitamin and mineral rich. I mean, not everybody has access to that, but if you do, that's clearly an even better option. Um, but I think that a lot of it is that the information that about food quality has become a grassroots movement.
Hmm.
And that means that, as this movement grows, more and more people are getting educated about what good, nutritious foods that are conducive to health are. But that information's not necessarily easy to find unless you're looking for it. And
Absolutely.
it's getting better, but it's not like the, nutrition experts that are going into the schools and teaching our kids about how to eat are actually giving them accurate information.
Well, and Sarah, the thing that I'm hopeful about though, because sometimes what I hear people say is whether or not they're calling it paleo or hunter gatherer or the caveman type thing, people tend to the mainstream may tend to bucket this as just another fad, like a fad type of diet, and that is so. I mean, time will tell, but that is so inaccurate simply because, like what you're saying here, for example, eating foods that contain more essential nutrients per calorie is better than eating foods that contain less essential nutrients per calorie is a fact. Like any person who disagrees with that, like either they're not thinking in terms of nutrition, like maybe they're like, well, from a moral perspective, you shouldn't eat animals, and that's a separate conversation. Like that's fine. Like if we want to have a moral conversation, let's have a moral conversation. But this is just math. Like literally, you're just doing math. You're just saying here are the foods that contain the most of which is required by human biology. And again, that's provable. Like even the USDA in their giant document that influences the dietary guidelines recognizes that the consumption of no carbohydrate is required for human health, but there are things that are required. So that's again, it's not even debatable. So why? And certainly we can say, well, can people eat these other foods and be okay? Well, sure. I mean, there's people that smoke and don't get lung cancer. That doesn't mean we recommend that people smoke in moderation. Right. I mean, there's also people that drink and don't have alcohol. I mean, that doesn't mean we give alcohol to, our infants in their baby bottles, right? Like we're sensitive to these things. So that's why I think we have an uphill battle to face, but the truth and even common sense is on our side. So I'm encouraged. What do you think?
Well, I'm obviously very passionate about the concept behind the paleo diet, but I tackle it because I have a science background. I did medical research for 4 years before deciding to become a stay-at-home mom, and I did research in inflammation and the immune system. So this is kind of my thing. I, I really, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, well, you know what it is, Sarah, is that you're thinking about these amazing, what are these barbecued stuffed bananas that I see that you have a recipe for on your website. You just had a flash of that in your mind because they've been flashing through my mind this entire podcast. I'm like, dude, I could totally use a barbecued stuffed banana right now. That sounds amazing.
Excited to make those bananas every time we barbecue. They're so good, and they're really good even as leftovers, so you can make like an entire bunch. So that really didn't help me like regain my train of thought.
No, it's no worries because it did allow me to segue just really briefly into the last thing I wanted to cover with you here today, Sarah, because I'm definitely gonna have you back on the show. We could talk forever, but the only, let's call it reasonable objection I've ever heard for what you're describing here and what I describe in my work, which is essentially just eat the foods that contain the most of what we need and the least of what we don't need, or that is counterproductive to health, which is again almost like saying more happiness is better than less happiness. Like it's the most obvious statement you could ever make, but people still find issue with it. The only real issue I've ever found to be reasonable is, okay, that's neat. It's great for you to say, eat these nutritious foods. But I am so busy. I've got kids. I've got a family. I don't have time to do this. Or it's not tasty. Sarah, what do you say to those people?
Well, I mean, it is really challenging to compete with foods that are engineered. I mean, junk food is engineered. There are people whose jobs it is at these companies to engineer food for it to be addictive. And it's hard to compete with those foods. It's hard to compete when you're used to those highly, highly palatable, completely empty, in terms of nutrition, foods. Great organic apple grown down the road is still not going to taste as good. But the really cool part is that your taste buds are constantly regenerating and they adapt very, very quickly. And avoiding those junk foods, it doesn't take very long before your body completely adapts. And suddenly those foods are the most delicious, fulfilling, amazing foods. I mean, and it really only takes a couple of weeks. I mean, you have an entirely new set of taste buds about every 6 months, but they adapt much faster than that. It takes a couple of weeks of, maybe you will feel deprived because you're not eating your, potato chips. But taste buds adapt so quickly. And when they do, it is just, you end up with so much more pleasure actually out of real food, because your body knows that it's getting nutrition that actually increases the pleasure response to those foods. The other,
Sarah, let me just drill into that because it's actually more pleasurable. I'm not sure if a truer statement has ever been said, and let me describe it, at least in my personal experience and what individuals I've talked to had experienced, where, okay, let's talk about the insane or the typical scenario of you eat one potato chip, and how's a good potato chip? But after one potato chip, you're actually less satisfied than before you ate that potato chip because now you just want a second potato chip. So you end up eating 2 potato, 3, 4, 5. Then you end up eating the entire bag of potato chips. and you're still not really satisfied, and you feel bad. Like you feel like you've cheated yourself. You don't feel good in any sense of the word. However, you shift from the dark side over over to a more sane and natural nutrient dense approach, and you eat one of these nutrient dense treats. You take a bite of it, and you're like, man, that's really good. But you don't feel this overwhelming craving. But you have a second bite because actually you know that it's actually good for you. It's not only is it not bad for you, it's good for you. And then you end up eating the whole thing, and you're satisfied and you're full and you feel again just complete, and you don't feel bad because you've nourished yourself. It's almost like, and this is a bit, I'm going to go out there a little bit. I don't know if this analogy will work, but it's a bit like if you met the right person and you were able to share an intimate moment with that person, and one that is based on mutual respect and love. That is truly so much more satisfying than just something picked up off the shelf. I mean, it's a deeper, more meaningful, realer, less guilty pleasure. And I think that once you experience that, for me at least, there's no going back. What do you think?
Well, I often refer to Oreo cookies as an abusive ex-boyfriend. So I think that analogy works really well. Yeah, I think, there is such a powerful connection between real nutrition and your hormones and your neurotransmitters. And when you can really nourish yourself, you completely change. I mean, the entire, your entire endocrine system. You regulate hormones so much better, and that impacts, far more deeply than just insulin regulation. I mean, it impacts your ability to handle stress. It impacts your ability to sleep, get really good quality sleep. It impacts your ability to take joy out of life. When you have nutrition, it makes you feel happier. And most people who, adopt sort of, not even necessarily a paleo diet, but a real food diet, or a whole foods diet, report having more energy, report, just feeling happier. It's fantastic for anybody with anxiety issues or depression. You know, those things are really, really important. But I did want to go back to, because one of the things that you mentioned was people who look at this way of eating and just say that they just don't have time for it. And that is a really important obstacle, because one of the things that I am saying is that you need to get back in the kitchen and cook food. And it's not that there's no convenience foods that you can eat that don't meet these criteria, because certainly there are. I mean, you can buy vegetables in a bag that are already cut and washed and ready to eat or ready to steam, and you can buy a rotisserie chicken that doesn't have any food chemicals sprinkled on it, depending on where you buy it. You can buy convenience foods. You can buy foods that are very, very healthful and don't require much in terms of preparation. But as a general rule, you're going to be making most of your own convenience foods. You're going to be cooking for your freezer and having your own meals to reheat in your freezer for nights where you just get home too late and don't have time to cook. You're going to be making your own, snack bars and trail mixes and things like that to bring with you for if you need a snack and you're not close to quality food. Yeah, I am saying that it is going to be a bigger time commitment, but that doesn't necessarily need to be a problem. Spending more time in the kitchen can be a great opportunity for including your kids in cooking. You can make it a family bonding experience. That's when I catch up on my podcast listening.
Well, and you also might not need to train 3 hours a day for a marathon or spend an hour driving to and from the gym every day, because this way of eating will do more for your health than any amount of time in the gym probably ever could.
Well, certainly. I mean, not to, underemphasize the importance of activity, but, diet really does have a bigger impact on your health than, especially if you're comparing sort of an hour of activity to three, or, a 20-minute walk around the neighborhood to a 30-mile run. Um, you know, there's, um, there's priorities, and I think spending time in the kitchen does have to become one, but it doesn't have to become a, a, laborious, arduous, oh, I can't stand chopping all these vegetables thing. I mean, it is something that, as people get more adept in the kitchen, I mean, I think a lot of people have forgotten how to cook.
Hmm.
That comfort with cooking just comes with time and experience. And, you make a recipe enough times, eventually you have to stop looking at how much of what goes in, and you just know, eventually you start measuring by handfuls. Eventually you know what spices go with what meats and what vegetables. And the only way to really gain that instinct in the kitchen is to be in the kitchen. And it gets easier, and it is an obstacle for people. Um, and for those people for whom it's an obstacle, there are choices. There are, paleo meal delivery companies that are coming up in various cities. You can always eat your food raw.
Well, and Sarah, this is an area where I know individuals can go to your website on and check out your books and find all kind of techniques by which they can reduce the amount of time and optimizations. Because, like you said, I mean, once you learn how to do these things, it's really not a chore, and it's really not that time consuming. And that website, again, folks, is thepaleomom.com. And Sarah's also got another book coming out in September. It's not out yet, but you can pre-order it, called The Paleo Approach, which is going to have a lot of great practical and how-to information, as well as a lot of great science. And of course, you can always listen to the Paleo View podcast. So right next to Smarter Science of Slim podcast, check out the Paleo View podcast. And Sarah, we've got to have you back, because this has just been awesome. And I'm sure, like, I'd love to get into some of the more tactical, how we can implement these things in the kitchen and how we can do these as busy individuals, if you'd be willing to come back on the show.
Love to. I mean, as you can tell, I can talk.
I love it. Well, you can tell you're full of energy, and for anyone who heard your story, which would be everyone who's listening to this podcast, would be amazed. I mean, please do hear the vibrancy in Sarah's voice. Look at Sarah's pictures on her website, because if we rewind back to that story, you could imagine thinking, this is an individual who would lose hope. And you can hear it in Sarah's voice that she is just a radiant individual. And she's not an individual who has had a life without challenge, right? She's got two young kids. She had all these autoimmune conditions, and she just through these simple, I mean, it may not be easy, but it is simple changes to her life have really transformed herself. And you can hear that in her voice. And Sarah, I just really appreciate you sharing all this insight with us and being such a wonderful example and being that change we wish to see in the world, as Gandhi put it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Hey, well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. Please do check out Sarah's website over at thepaleomom.com and check out her upcoming book, The Paleo Approach. Pre-order that. Support her. She's doing great work. She's a great example. And remember this week to eat more and exercise less, but do that smarter. Talk to you soon.